when a human warrior gave his blood to a dying alien princess. What happened next is unbelievable. The war had raged on for years. Humanity, struggling to protect its place in the galaxy, found itself fighting against the mighty Zyphar Empire. These alien creatures were unlike anything Earth had encountered before. They were strong, intelligent, and technologically advanced. But despite all their power, they had one weakness: arrogance. They believed their species was superior in every way, and they looked down on humans as little more than ants to be crushed. Captain Riker Steele was one of Earth's finest soldiers. A seasoned warrior, he had been in countless battles, but this one on Crichton IV felt different. It wasn't just about winning, it was about survival. The Zyphar had taken control of the planet's key resources, and humanity had no choice but to fight for it. Riker and his unit had been sent on a high-risk mission to sabotage the Zyphar's forces and disrupt their supply lines. But as the battle unfolded, something unexpected happened. Amid the explosions, the blaring alarms, and the chaos, Riker's eyes caught sight of something that stopped him in his tracks: a royal Zyphar soldier, a woman, lying in the middle of the battlefield. She was alone and she wasn't moving. Her purple skin, the signature of her species, was stained with dark blood, and her silver armor was cracked in several places. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. Riker didn't know why he stopped. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was compassion. But something within him told him he couldn't just leave her to die. She was an enemy, yes, but there was no honor in letting someone suffer like this, especially not someone who, despite being his enemy, looked so human in her vulnerability. He sprinted towards her, ignoring the bullets whizzing past his head and the distant sound of battle cries. As he knelt beside her, he could see the extent of her injuries. A deep wound ran across her abdomen, and the blood soaking her clothes wasn't slowing down. Her hands, which had once held powerful weapons, now lay limp by her sides. She was dying. For a moment, Riker just stared at her, unsure of what to do. His training told him to leave her. After all, she was a Zyphar princess. She was a key figure in the enemy's war effort. If she died, it would be a significant blow to their cause. But his heart told him something else. He reached for his belt, pulling out a small first aid kit. He had to act quickly. The battlefield around him was still alive with gunfire, but here, in this small corner of the war, there was only him and this alien woman. He tried to stop the bleeding with gauze, but the injury was too severe. She wasn't going to make it unless something drastic happened. In a moment of desperation, Riker did something he'd never done before. He unsheathed a knife from his boot and, without thinking twice, cut open his own arm. Blood poured from the wound, dark and red, staining his uniform. It was a risk of infection, of losing too much blood, of losing his own life. But it was the only thing he could think of that might work. He pressed his bleeding arm to the princess's mouth, letting his blood drip into her. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited, praying that something would happen, anything to stop the inevitable. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing changed. Riker's arm ached from the pain, and the princess remained motionless, her once glowing violet skin now dull under the harsh lights of the battlefield. But then, slowly, a shift occurred. Her skin started to shimmer faintly, the faintest glow beginning to return. Her breathing became steadier and her eyelids fluttered open. Riker's pulse quickened as he watched her regain consciousness. She stared up at him, her violet eyes wide with confusion. "Why?" Her voice was soft, strained. She seemed to be struggling to understand what had just happened. "Why did you help me?" Riker's mind raced. He had no answer for her. He didn't know why. All he knew was that he couldn't stand by and let her die, even though she was his enemy. He looked down at his bloodied arm, now cradled in her hand. "You were dying," he said, his voice rough. "I couldn't just leave you." For a moment, the princess just stared at him. Her expression was a mix of confusion and gratitude, but she didn't speak. Riker took a step back, unsure of what to do next. The war around them still raged on. His comrades were still fighting. The battle hadn't stopped just because he had chosen to save a life. The princess shifted, slowly trying to sit up, her strength returning faster than Riker had expected. She winced as she moved, but it was clear that her wounds were healing at an extraordinary rate. Riker watched in disbelief. He had seen his own blood work wonders in the past. His body had incredible regenerative capabilities, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a healing factor. It was as if the very life force in his blood was bringing her back to life. She looked up at him, her eyes piercing into his soul. "What have you done to me?" she asked, her voice sharp and full of awe. "I don't know," Riker replied honestly, "but it looks like it worked." For a long moment neither spoke. The sounds of war still filled the air, distant and loud. But in that moment it felt like time had stopped. The enemy princess, who had moments ago been a symbol of everything Riker fought against, was now sitting before him, alive, and looking at him with a strange mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "I am Princess Talara of the Zyphar Empire," she said softly, her voice now steady. "And you've just saved my life." Riker nodded, still too stunned to speak. His mind was racing. He had no idea what this meant, what consequences his actions might have for the future of the war, for the fate of his people, or for the Zyphar Empire. But one thing was certain. Everything had changed in that moment. He had saved her, but now she was more than just an enemy. She was something else, something unknown, something he couldn't quite understand. "Why did you do it?" she asked again, her voice softer this time, almost as if she was asking herself as much as she was asking him. Riker took a deep breath, his hand still throbbing from the wound. "Because I don't believe in leaving someone to die, even if they're my enemy. We're all just trying to survive." Talara's eyes softened as she looked at him. For the first time she saw not a soldier of her enemy, but a man who had acted out of a deep sense of humanity. In that moment, something changed in her too. They didn't know it yet, but this single act would shape the future of both their worlds. Neither the humans nor the Zyphar would ever be the same again. The battle on Crichton IV continued to rage around them, but for Captain Riker Steele and Princess Talara, time seemed to slow. The distant sounds of gunfire and explosions were muffled in the background as they stood in an uneasy silence. Talara, the alien princess he had just saved, now sat before him, her violet skin glowing softly in the dim light. She seemed almost unearthly, like something from a distant legend. Riker, still trying to make sense of what had happened, kept glancing nervously at the battlefield. His men were still fighting. His orders had been clear: sabotage the enemy's supply lines, disrupt their forces, and then retreat. But instead, he had done something he never expected. He had saved the life of an enemy princess, a powerful figure in the Zyphar Empire. The very people who had been invading human space. As the minutes ticked by, Riker realized he couldn't just walk away from this. He couldn't just go back to his unit and pretend that what had happened wasn't important. What had happened here, his blood, her survival, was something much bigger than one battle, bigger than this war. Talara slowly got to her feet, her expression now more alert and focused. Her wounds were completely gone. The blood-stained armor she had worn was somehow intact, and she didn't seem weak at all. She looked stronger than she had before the battle. Her eyes, which had once been clouded with pain, now burned with curiosity and something else, something Riker couldn't name. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice still carrying a sense of disbelief. "I don't understand. My people, no one heals this fast." Riker didn't know how to respond. His mind raced with questions. What had happened to her? How was his blood capable of doing this? Was it just his biology, or was there something more to it? He had heard of humans being resilient in ways that defied explanation, but this was different. This was beyond anything he had experienced. "Your people," Riker began, his voice steady despite the confusion swirling in his mind. What are they really like? What's your empire like? Talara's gaze darkened slightly, and for a moment Riker thought she might be angry, but her expression softened and she sighed, almost as though the weight of her empire's secrets was too heavy to bear. The Zyphar are a proud species, she explained. We've conquered worlds, taken resources from countless civilizations. We thought we were invincible, but now we're dying. Riker's brow furrowed. He had known the Zyphar were powerful, but he hadn't realized they were on the brink of extinction. Dying? He asked. What do you mean? Talara looked away for a moment, lost in thought. There's a plague. It's been spreading for years and no one knows how to stop it. It affects our entire population. The disease ravages our bodies, weakening us until we are little more than shells of who we once were. We've tried everything, medicine, science, even ancient Zyphar magic, but nothing works. We are dying, and without a cure our empire will fall. Riker listened carefully, trying to understand. The Zyphar had been a fearsome enemy, yet hearing Talara speak like this, it was almost like hearing the voice of someone trapped in a cage of their own making. So, you came to Crichton IV for a cure, Riker asked, piecing the puzzle together. But you're fighting a war against humanity too. Talara nodded. Yes, Crichton IV is the last known place where we can find the resources needed to create a cure. But the humans got here first and now we're fighting over it. It's a desperate race. I thought we could win, that we could take what we needed. But now, she paused, her eyes lingering on Riker as if she were seeing him for the first time. But now I don't know, she finished softly. Riker stood still, his mind spinning. He had thought of the Zyphar as enemies, cruel invaders who would stop at nothing to conquer humanity. But hearing Talara speak of her people's suffering, of their dying race, changed everything. It didn't make the Zyphar less dangerous, but it made them human. Just like everyone else, they were fighting for survival. You've been using people, haven't you? Riker asked. His voice was sharp, the bitterness of the war creeping into his words. Taking what you need, no matter the cost. Talara didn't flinch, she had no defense. We had no choice, she said. The plague has no mercy, our people had to act or we would perish, but I didn't know. She stopped herself, realizing that the words she was about to say would not change the past. Riker understood. In the end, survival drove people to do unimaginable things, no matter what species they were. I'm sorry, she said, her voice low. I've never had the chance to choose my path. I was born into this, but now that I've experienced what you did for me, I don't know anymore. It feels wrong. Riker looked at her. There was no anger in his gaze, only quiet understanding. Maybe it's not too late, he said. Maybe we can still stop this. Both sides are fighting, but maybe there's a way to end this war before it destroys us both. Talara looked at him, her violet eyes wide with uncertainty. You would help me, after everything, Riker's voice softened. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not going to leave you to fight this alone. The words were out before he even thought about them. He didn't know what had come over him. Maybe it was the strange connection he felt to her, or perhaps the humanity in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. But whatever the reason, Riker knew he couldn't walk away from this. He had to help her, not just because he had saved her life, but because, for the first time in the war, he saw a chance for something different. Talara hesitated for a long moment. She had been trained to trust only her people, to see humans as nothing more than obstacles. But now, after what had happened, after feeling the blood of a human warrior inside her veins, she couldn't deny the bond between them. I don't know how to stop this, Talara admitted. The plague, it's beyond anything I've seen. And if my people find out what you've done, they'll never forgive me. I don't care about forgiveness, Riker replied. I care about stopping this madness. We have a chance, Talara. Together, we can find a way. For a moment, there was a silence between them, the weight of their words hanging in the air. It wasn't just about the plague or the war anymore. It was about something bigger, something neither of them could fully understand yet. Talara finally nodded, a quiet determination settling in her eyes. Then we'll find a way. As the two of them turned back toward the battlefield, they knew there was no going back. Riker and Talara were no longer just enemies on opposite sides of a war. They were now something more. Allies, perhaps, or maybe just two people fighting to survive. Only time would tell. The quiet moments after their decision felt like an illusion. Riker and Talara had agreed to work together, to find a way to end the war and the plague that threatened the Zyphar. But deep down, Riker knew things wouldn't be easy. The war wasn't just about resources or survival. It was about pride, power, and control. Both the humans and the Zyphar had too much at stake to simply walk away. As they made their way through the wreckage of the battlefield, Talara, still weak but steadily regaining her strength, moved with a surprising grace. She no longer looked like the broken enemy princess she had been just hours ago. The healing process had worked far beyond their expectations. It wasn't just her physical strength that had returned. There was something different about her, a newfound power that made her seem almost otherworldly. Riker couldn't help but watch her. She had been saved by his blood, and yet now she was standing tall, a symbol of something he didn't fully understand. The Zyphar Empire had always been cruel, calculating, and relentless, but here she was, an individual, struggling with the same fears and uncertainties that any human might face. As they neared the edge of the battlefield, they stopped. A small group of human soldiers had gathered around a makeshift command post. They weren't expecting Riker to return so soon, let alone with a Zyphar princess at his side. "Captain," one of the soldiers, a young private named Jenkins, rushed forward. He froze when he saw Talara standing beside Riker. His eyes widened in disbelief. Is that her, the Zyphar princess?" Riker nodded, his voice calm. "Yes, Jenkins, this is Princess Talara. She's not our enemy anymore." The soldier blinked, his face a mix of confusion and hesitation. "But Captain, we've been fighting them for years. The Zyphar—" "I know," Riker interrupted. "But things have changed. We have to look at this differently." Talara stepped forward, her expression unwavering, but her eyes held a flicker of doubt. "The Zyphar Empire is not what you think it is. We are dying. The plague that has infected my people is beyond anything we can control. I know I am an enemy to you, but I didn't choose this." "None of us did." Jenkins opened his mouth to say something, but Riker silenced him with a glance. There was no time for arguments. This was not about politics anymore. It was about survival. Talara had just given them a glimpse into the heart of the Zyphar Empire, and it wasn't a pretty picture. Their entire race was on the brink of extinction. It wasn't just a war for resources anymore. It was a war for the future of their species. One of the other soldiers, Sergeant Carson, spoke up, his tone hard. "What do you mean, not our enemy anymore? You expect us to just trust her, Captain. She's the enemy we've been fighting, and now you want us to turn our backs on everything we've been doing." Riker looked at Carson, his gaze firm. "I'm not asking you to trust her right away. I'm asking you to listen. We have a choice to make. We can keep fighting for a resource that's running out, or we can do something that might change everything." Talara looked between the soldiers, her gaze sharp but not cold. "I don't want war, I never did. But I also know that if we don't stop this, we will lose everything. I'm asking you to help us find a cure, to help me save my people." The silence that followed was thick, as if the weight of her words hung in the air like a dense fog. For a moment, no one spoke. The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, and Riker could sense their reluctance. Trust wasn't something that could be built in a day, especially when it had been shattered by years of conflict. Finally, Carson spoke again, his voice less hostile but still wary. "So, what's the plan, Captain? What do you expect us to do with her?" "She's a princess, not a doctor." Riker sighed, his hand running through his hair. "We're going to take her to our medical facility. There's a chance the cure we need is there, and if not, we'll have to find another way. We're not asking for a miracle. We're asking for a chance." Talara, who had been silent for a moment, nodded. "I will do whatever I can to help. But you need to understand, even if we find a cure, it won't be easy. My people, they won't accept this. They won't accept me for what I've done. And you," she looked at Riker, "won't be seen as a hero by your own people." Riker met her gaze. "I'm not doing this for recognition. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do." The soldiers looked uneasy, but after a long pause, Jenkins spoke again. "So we're just going to let her walk into our camp, Captain. You know what they'll think back at headquarters. We'll be labeled traitors." "We don't have a choice," Riker said firmly. "We either find a way to stop the plague or we'll be fighting this war for nothing." The group fell silent again, but this time there was a new sense of resolve in the air. Slowly, one by one, the soldiers began to nod. It wasn't trust, but it was a beginning. They were all soldiers, after all. They understood duty, even if it meant facing the unknown. Talara stepped forward, her eyes softening as she spoke again. "I know this is hard. I know the Zyphar have done terrible things, and I was a part of that. But I'm not the enemy anymore. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance." Riker looked at her, his voice quiet but determined. "Then let's take that chance." Later that night, as the camp settled into a cautious routine, Riker and Talara sat at a small table near the edge of the camp, away from the eyes of the soldiers. The firelight flickered between them, casting long shadows on the ground. "We've come a long way," Riker said, his voice thoughtful. Talara nodded. "I never thought I would be here in this situation with you." There was a long pause before Riker spoke again. "What happens if we succeed? If we find the cure and end the plague, what then?" Talara looked into the fire, her eyes distant. "I don't know. My people won't see me as their princess anymore. And even if we stop the war, the scars of everything we've done will remain." Riker understood. The damage caused by years of war and conflict couldn't be undone with a single act of kindness, but maybe it could be a start, a chance for something new. "We'll figure it out," he said, "one step at a time." Talara's gaze softened as she looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," Riker smiled faintly. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we're not alone either." The two of them sat in silence, watching the flames dance in the night air. They knew the path ahead would be long, difficult, and filled with uncertainty. But for the first time in a long while, they both felt like they were fighting for something more than just survival. They were fighting for a chance to change everything. The days after the decision were tense. Riker and Talara had left the battlefield behind, heading towards the human medical facility where the cure for the Zyphar plague was said to be stored. But the journey wasn't just about getting there. It was about surviving the forces on both sides who would never accept what they were trying to do. The first obstacle came on the third day of travel. Riker and Talara's small group, comprising a handful of soldiers and a few trusted allies, came across a scouting party of Zyphar soldiers. The soldiers didn't recognize Talara, and the princess, for a moment, considered fleeing into the shadows, but Riker shook his head. "We face them head-on. We can't risk being caught," he said quietly. "You stay close, trust me." They moved quickly but quietly, weapons drawn. Talara, still learning to adapt to her new circumstances, was ready to fight but unsure of her abilities. It was strange. Her strength was there, but it was as if something in her had changed. She was no longer just the princess of a dying empire, but someone with the potential to end it all. As the Zyphar soldiers came closer, Riker made his move. He didn't fire first. He never did. Instead, he used his agility to slip behind them and incapacitate two of the soldiers with swift, practiced moves. Talara followed, more hesitant at first, but as the chaos of the brief fight unfolded, she found her courage. Her newfound abilities flared to life, and before she even realized what had happened, she had knocked out another soldier with a single strike. The last Zyphar soldier attempted to run, but Riker's blaster stopped him cold, and just like that, the fight was over. Talara stood still for a moment, catching her breath. "I didn't know I could do that," she said softly, eyes wide with surprise. Riker smiled briefly. "You're stronger than you think." They moved on, leaving the defeated soldiers behind. But their journey wasn't getting any easier. Every step they took, every new day brought with it more risks. The humans were divided, unsure whether to embrace or reject the idea of helping the Zyphar princess. Some saw her as a symbol of hope, while others viewed her as nothing more than a tool, a pawn in a game of survival. But Riker knew one thing: he couldn't stop now. They were getting closer to the medical facility, closer to the cure that might save millions of lives. It was the 5th day when the worst happened. They had been traveling through a dense forest on the outskirts of the medical base when they were ambushed. Riker heard the snap of branches behind them and immediately turned to see a group of humans, not soldiers but a group of civilians, each carrying weapons. "Stop right there," one of them shouted. "This is a traitor and her ally. The Zyphar princess doesn't deserve your help." The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar across his face, stepped forward, his eyes filled with rage. "You think you can just walk away with her, Steele? You've sided with the enemy, and we're not going to let you get away with it." Riker stepped in front of Talara instinctively, his hand reaching for his blaster. "You don't understand," he said firmly. "She's not the enemy anymore. We're trying to save both our people from something worse than the war. The plague." "The plague," the man spat, cutting him off. "We've been fighting the Zyphar for years, and you think that giving them a cure will solve everything. They've killed our families, our friends. They've ruined our lives. How can you stand with them, Steele?" Riker's jaw clenched. He understood the anger. He knew what it was like to lose people, to feel powerless in the face of an unstoppable enemy. But he also knew that continuing the cycle of violence would only lead to more destruction. "It's not just about us anymore," Riker said, his voice steady. "We have to think about the future. If we don't stop the plague, if we don't find a cure, this war will be meaningless. We'll destroy each other. That's what they want. The Zyphar want us to fight. But if we can help them, we can end this. For everyone." Talara stood behind him, her expression resolute, though the tension was clear in her stance. "Please," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm not the enemy. I never wanted this war. My people are dying, and I don't want to see anyone else suffer. I just want to save my people, and yours too." There was a long silence as the group of civilians exchanged looks. Riker held his breath, unsure of what would happen next. These were people who had lost everything, who had seen their families torn apart by the very people he was trying to save. Could they understand? Could they forgive? Finally, the leader of the group lowered his weapon, his eyes dark with pain. I don't know if I can forgive you, but if what you say is true, if you really can stop the plague, then maybe you're right. Maybe we've all been blind. But it's not just you and me, Steele, it's everyone else. If this goes wrong, we'll all pay the price." Riker nodded slowly. "I know, and I'm ready to take that risk." The civilians stepped back, allowing them to continue their journey. Talara, still shaken, took a deep breath. "Thank you," she whispered to Riker. "I didn't expect them to listen." Riker gave her a reassuring smile. Sometimes, the right words can change everything. It was just a few hours later when they reached the medical facility. The large, white building stood at the center of a wide valley, surrounded by thick walls and guarded entrances. The human base had been untouched by the war, hidden, protected, and secure. Inside, the cure for the Zyphar plague was stored in highly guarded labs, and the military had been working tirelessly to create a solution. But it wasn't that easy. As soon as they stepped inside, they were met by a team of doctors, led by General Harris, a tall, stern-faced man who had a reputation for being as tough as nails. He looked at Riker with disbelief, his eyes narrowing when he saw Talara. "You brought her here," Harris demanded, his voice sharp. You think we can trust her steel after everything the Zyphar have done? I know it's hard to believe, Riker said, his voice steady, but this is the only way. We need her to help us understand how to create the cure. Without her, we're fighting a losing battle. General Harris looked at Talara, his eyes full of suspicion. And what makes you think we'll trust you? You're the princess of a dying empire. What do you owe us? I owe you nothing, Talara said, her voice strong, but I'm here because it's the right thing to do. My people are dying, and I don't want to see anyone else suffer because of a plague we can't control. The room went silent. General Harris studied her for a moment, weighing his options. Finally, he gave a single nod. All right, we'll help you, but this isn't over, not by a long shot. They worked through the night, and by the early hours of the next morning, they had made a breakthrough. Talara's blood, combined with the human medical technology, revealed a key component of the cure. It was a slow process, but the pieces were falling into place. As the first dose of the cure was administered, Riker watched Talara's face. For the first time since this journey began, he saw a spark of hope in her eyes. She wasn't just a princess of a dying empire anymore. She was a symbol of something greater, a chance for peace, a chance to rebuild. When the cure was distributed to the Zyphar population, the plague began to recede. Slowly but surely, the Zyphar were healed. The war didn't end immediately, but a new path forward had been forged. Riker and Talara, once enemies, had changed the course of history. And as the stars shone brightly overhead, Riker knew that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Together, humanity and the Zyphar could rebuild, not just their worlds but their very futures.